the Russia-China alliance that shakes the world. What happens when the world's largest country by land mass joins forces with the world's largest manufacturer? The answer is transforming global trade routes and military power dynamics. Picture this: a massive new pipeline pumping Russian gas into Chinese factories, while their warships conduct joint exercises in disputed waters. Like tectonic plates shifting beneath the geopolitical landscape, this partnership is changing everything. In this investigation, we map the extensive network between Russia and China, from billion-dollar energy deals to coordinated military exercises that increasingly alarm Western strategists. Their alliance represents a fundamental challenge to the established international order that few Western leaders anticipated: the end of the unipolar moment. December 26, 1991. The red Soviet flag is lowered from the Kremlin for the final time, replaced by the tricolor of the Russian Federation. This singular moment marked the end of not just a country, but an entire global system. For nearly 5 decades, two superpowers had maintained an uneasy equilibrium, each commanding its own sphere of influence across a divided world. The collapse of the USSR into 15 separate republics instantly transformed the bipolar structure that had defined international relations since World War II. American political scientist Charles Krauthammer captured this unprecedented shift with a term that would define the era: "We are in a unipolar world. No other nation or probable coalition can balance the power of the United States." The United States stood alone at the pinnacle of global power, combining unmatched military might, economic strength, cultural influence, and technological prowess. American military spending eclipsed that of the next dozen countries combined, while the U.S. dollar dominated international finance. From the Persian Gulf to the Panama Canal, American forces projected power virtually unopposed. This dominance found expression in Francis Fukuyama's thesis about the end of history, the idea that Western liberal democracy represented the final form of human government. The collapse of Soviet communism appeared to confirm market capitalism and democratic politics as definitively superior. For Russia, the transition proved brutal. The 1990s brought economic devastation, with GDP falling by nearly 40%. Hyperinflation wiped out savings, life expectancy plummeted, and once mighty Soviet industries crumbled. A former superpower now struggled with the humiliation of accepting economic aid from Western institutions. Early in this period, Russian leaders under Boris Yeltsin pivoted toward the West, embracing market reforms and democratic institutions. Many Russians genuinely hoped their country could eventually integrate into Western structures as an equal partner. These hopes collapsed as NATO extended membership to former Warsaw Pact countries starting in 1999. Each new member, Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and later the Baltic states, was perceived in Moscow as another step in an American strategy of encirclement. While Russia struggled, China navigated its own complicated relationship with the emerging American-led order. The Tiananmen Square protests had already strained China's relations with Western powers. This pressure intensified during the Taiwan Strait crisis of 1995 to 1996, when the U.S. dispatched 2 aircraft carrier battle groups after China conducted missile tests near Taiwan. The demonstration delivered a sobering message to Beijing about America's capability and willingness to project military power. For both Russia and China, the 1990s offered harsh lessons about the new global order. Despite rhetoric about integration, both powers increasingly perceived that the U.S.-led system was structured to maintain American primacy while constraining potential competitors. Western-led globalization, initially embraced as an economic opportunity, began to look like a political threat, a vehicle for promoting Western values that could undermine their regimes. This perception crystallized during the Kosovo War in 1999, when NATO launched airstrikes against Yugoslavia without UN Security Council authorization. For both countries, this action represented a dangerous precedent. When the Chinese embassy in Belgrade was bombed during the campaign, killing 3 Chinese journalists, Beijing rejected U.S. claims that the strike was accidental. The pattern continued into the early 2000s. the U.S. withdrawal from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty in 2002, and missile defense deployments in Eastern Europe alarmed Russian military planners. The Iraq War, launched in 2003 without UN approval, reinforced perceptions that America would act unilaterally, disregarding international institutions when convenient. For China, America's military presence in Afghanistan and Central Asia after September 11th created new strategic pressures. The U.S. Navy threatened China's vital sea lanes, while American criticism of Chinese currency and trade practices intensified. These shared experiences gradually pushed two former adversaries toward a pragmatic reassessment of their relationship. Despite lingering historical mistrust, Moscow and Beijing recognized that cooperation might serve their mutual interests in a world dominated by American power. The Soviet collapse, which initially created an unprecedented opportunity for American leadership, ultimately set in motion forces that would challenge that dominance. By treating Russia as a defeated power and pursuing policies that China perceived as threatening, Western nations inadvertently created conditions for an alignment between their two most significant geopolitical challengers. This reorientation developed gradually. Throughout the 1990s, both Russia and China maintained their primary focus on relations with the West. But beneath the surface, the foundations for a new strategic partnership were taking shape. One based not on shared ideology, but on shared interests in navigating an American-dominated system. The unipolar moment contained the seeds of its own transformation. American primacy, rather than marking the end of history, catalyzed a counterbalancing alignment that would eventually challenge the foundation of the post-Cold War order. The Shanghai Five, first steps toward alliance. The most powerful challenges to global order often begin with the most mundane solutions. As Russia and China faced the chaos of post-Soviet borders in the early 1990s, they made a pragmatic choice that defied centuries of mutual suspicion. What began as simple boundary demarcation talks between wary neighbors would evolve into perhaps the most consequential geopolitical counterweight of the 21st century. The dissolution of the Soviet Union left China sharing borders with four new countries where once it had only faced the USSR: Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. These borders stretched over 7,000 kilometers through challenging terrain, from Central Asian steppes to the Far East wilderness. Many sections remained poorly defined or disputed after decades of tension, representing dangerous flashpoints. The 1969 clashes along the Ushuri River, which had brought fears of nuclear escalation, remained a fresh memory. For China, securing its western frontier was crucial for stability, particularly in Xinjiang. For Russia and Central Asia, resolving these disputes was essential during their difficult economic transitions. Like engineers laying the first planks of a bridge across treacherous waters, these nations began constructing a diplomatic structure that would eventually span continents. April 26, 1996, marked a transformative moment when representatives from these five nations gathered in Shanghai to sign an agreement on military confidence-building measures. This treaty on deepening military trust in border regions reduced troop concentrations along borders and created consultation mechanisms to prevent misunderstandings. The Shanghai Five had created a cooperative framework based on mutual security interests. The agreement required notifications before military exercises within 100 kilometers of borders and established regular meetings between defense officials. This represented the first multilateral security mechanism in the region not dominated by Western powers, an initial plank in what would become a bridge to a new geopolitical alignment. In April 1997, the Shanghai Five signed the Treaty on Reduction of Military Forces in Border Regions in Moscow, establishing concrete limits on military deployments and creating demilitarized zones along previously tense frontiers. Each agreement strengthened the diplomatic bridge, adding stability and bearing more weight. The framework soon expanded beyond border security. Annual summits became regular diplomatic fixtures, with each member hosting on rotation. By 1998, the Almaty Summit had broadened discussions to include regional terrorism, religious extremism, and drug trafficking. issues affecting all 5 countries. The peaceful resolution of border disputes yielded concrete results. By 2000, China had negotiated boundary agreements with Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, resolving 98% of disputed borders. Progress continued on the more complex China-Russia border. This border diplomacy foundation supported more ambitious construction. In June 2001, the 5 original members plus Uzbekistan established the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO. This transformation from a border security forum into a permanent international organization with a charter and secretariat in Beijing signaled a new phase in Eurasian integration. The SCO's founding charter emphasized principles different from Western models, rejecting hegemony, while advancing a new security concept based on mutual benefit. It enshrined non-interference in internal affairs, challenging Western notions that human rights concerns could justify intervention. The timing proved significant. Just 3 months before the September 11th attacks would bring American military presence to Central Asia. The organizational bridge now provided a ready framework for Russia and China to coordinate their responses. As the SCO expanded, each new plank strengthened the structure. Economic collaboration became central, with initiatives on trade, investment, and infrastructure. Cultural exchanges built people-to-people connections. By 2003, the organization implemented joint projects ranging from energy to telecommunications. The SCO began conducting joint military exercises, starting with limited peace mission exercises in 2003 between Chinese and Kyrgyz forces. By 2005, these expanded dramatically to involve 10,000 troops from China and Russia in complex operations, the first major joint exercise between these former adversaries since the Cold War. The organization's gravitational pull extended widely. Mongolia joined as an observer in 2004, followed by Iran, Pakistan, and India in 2005. This created a network encompassing much of Asia, excluding American allies like Japan and South Korea. For China, the SCO advanced its Western development strategy while securing frontier regions. For Russia, it maintained influence in former Soviet spheres while counterbalancing Western power. For smaller Central Asian states, membership provided leverage between powerful neighbors. By the mid-2000s, this modest border security forum had evolved into the institutional framework for a new Eurasian alignment independent of Western influence, a completed bridge connecting previously suspicious neighbors. This evolution exemplified a different approach to international institution building than Western models. Rather than beginning with grand declarations, the Shanghai process addressed specific, manageable problems. It prioritized practical cooperation over ideological alignment and respected diverse political systems among members, laying plank after plank until a stable structure emerged. The Western push, unintended consequences. In a profound geopolitical irony, the very policies designed to expand Western influence became the catalyst that cemented the Russia-China partnership. While Moscow and Beijing were building pragmatic cooperation through the Shanghai process, Washington and its allies were making decisions that would fundamentally reshape the strategic calculations of both powers. The early 2000s marked a critical shift in how both Russia and China perceived Western intentions. The U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2003 stands as a watershed moment. Despite lacking UN Security Council authorization, the United States assembled a coalition of the willing to overthrow Saddam Hussein's regime based on claims of weapons of mass destruction that were never found. Leaders in Moscow and Beijing saw this as evidence America would bypass international institutions when they constrained its objectives. Vladimir Putin, initially supportive of the U.S. war on terror, condemned the Iraq invasion as a grave political error. Chinese President Hu Jintao similarly criticized the action as undermining the UN-centered international order. Both powers recognized a concerning precedent. If America could unilaterally remove a government in Iraq, similar interventions might occur elsewhere when American interests dictated. This concern deepened during the color revolutions in post-Soviet states, 2003 to 2005 the Rose Revolution in Georgia, Orange Revolution in Ukraine, and Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan. Each followed a similar pattern. Mass protests against allegedly fraudulent elections replacing pro-Russian governments with Western-leaning ones. While Western governments described these as democratic movements, Moscow and Beijing saw external manipulation. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov characterized them as engineered from the outside according to prepared scenarios, noting Western funding of opposition groups. For Beijing, having faced the Tiananmen Square protests, these movements represented a dangerous template for regime change potentially applicable to China. The perception of Western-backed regime change intensified with NATO's 2011 Libya intervention. What began as a UN-authorized humanitarian mission transformed into an operation to overthrow Gaddafi. Having abstained from vetoing the UN resolution, both powers felt betrayed when NATO's actions expanded beyond the mandate. Russian Prime Minister Medvedev stated, "The way the resolution is being implemented confirms that we were right when we decided not to send our troops into Libya." NATO's eastward expansion simultaneously heightened Russian security concerns. The 2004 accession of 7 new members, including the Baltic states bordering Russia, brought the alliance to Russia's doorstep. The 2008 NATO Bucharest Declaration that Ukraine and Georgia will become members directly challenged Russia's sphere of influence. The U.S. missile defense system in Eastern Europe further strained relations. Despite Washington's insistence, it targeted Iranian threats. Moscow viewed it as undermining Russia's nuclear deterrent. When the Obama administration announced plans to deploy these systems in Poland and Romania, President Medvedev warned of a new arms race. China faced different pressures with similar effects. The Obama administration's 2011 pivot to Asia rebalanced American military and diplomatic resources toward the Asia-Pacific, strengthening alliances that effectively encircled China. Economic tensions grew as Western countries scrutinized Chinese investments and technology companies, reinforcing Beijing's perception of containment efforts. The pivotal moment accelerating the Russia-China partnership came in 2014 after Russia's annexation of Crimea. Western economic sanctions, Russia's expulsion from the G8, and diplomatic isolation effectively closed off Russia's Western integration. With European markets restricted, Russia pivoted eastward. The timing benefited both nations. China, facing growing U.S. trade tensions, welcomed a reliable supplier of energy and military technology resistant to Western pressure. Russia found in China a partner with abundant capital and a massive consumer base. Their pragmatic alignment evolved into strategic necessity. Results materialized quickly. In May 2014, just months after the Crimea annexation, Putin and Xi signed a landmark $400 billion gas deal that had been negotiated for over a decade. This 30-year agreement to supply Russian gas to China through the power of Siberia pipeline symbolized their decisive geopolitical realignment. Bilateral trade surged from $88 billion in 2013 to $108 billion in 2018. Military cooperation expanded dramatically, with joint naval exercises extending to the Mediterranean and Baltic Seas, traditional NATO domains. Intelligence sharing deepened, and Russia accelerated sales of advanced weapons to China. Perhaps most significantly, Russia and China began coordinating international positions with unprecedented consistency. In the UN Security Council, they increasingly cast joint vetoes against Western-backed resolutions. Their voting alignment in the UN General Assembly reached new heights. The Western response to Ukraine inadvertently provided Russia and China with a powerful shared narrative that the U.S.-led world order was designed to contain them, necessitating mutual support. As president, she stated during a 2015 Moscow visit, "No matter how the international landscape may change, we must firmly support each other in defending our respective sovereignty, security, and development interests." Western policies created what scholars call threat convergence, where powers perceiving similar threats develop aligned interests. actions intended to pressure either Russia or China individually pushed them closer together, transforming tactical cooperation into a strategic partnership with global implications. Complementary powers, the perfect partnership. Beyond their common adversaries, Russia and China have discovered something far more valuable in each other: the missing pieces to their individual power puzzles. What makes their partnership particularly formidable isn't just shared opposition to Western influence, but the almost perfect symmetry of their national strengths and weaknesses. This complementary relationship transforms what might otherwise be just another diplomatic alignment into a genuinely synergistic alliance with global implications. Like two halves of a geopolitical jigsaw puzzle finally interlocking, Russia and China each provide what the other critically lacks. Russia contributes a treasure trove of natural resources spanning 11 time zones, controlling approximately 24% of world's gas reserves, 47.8 trillion cubic meters, ranking 6th globally in oil reserves, 80 billion barrels, and possessing roughly 30% of global mineral resources, including critical deposits of palladium, platinum, nickel, and rare earth elements essential for technology manufacturing. This resource abundance gains strategic value through geographic proximity. Unlike other suppliers whose exports must travel through vulnerable sea lanes, Russian resources flow across a shared 4,209-kilometer border through pipelines and rail networks immune to naval blockades. The agricultural dimension reinforces this advantage. Russia, with 9% of the world's arable land, has become the world's largest wheat exporter, 37 million tons annually, providing food security to China, which has 20% of global population, but only 7% of arable land. China, conversely, offers manufacturing capacity, capital, and consumer markets. As the world's factory producing approximately 28% of global manufacturing output, China's industrial ecosystem spans from basic goods to sophisticated electronics and cutting-edge technologies. For Russia's economy, historically dependent on importing finished goods while exporting raw materials, this manufacturing access reduces dependence on Western imports vulnerable to sanctions. The financial partnership became crucial after Western sanctions isolated Russia from global markets. China's banking system, the world's largest by assets at approximately $53 trillion, provides alternative capital and investment. Chinese foreign exchange reserves exceeding $3 trillion offer potential stabilization for the Russian ruble, while China's $1.4 billion consumer market provides Russian exporters alternatives to Western markets. Their military and technological complementarity proves equally strategic. Russia maintains expertise in specific defense sectors where China has historically lagged: aircraft engine technology, submarine quieting techniques, and certain missile systems. Russian nuclear and space capabilities, with a legacy stretching back to Sputnik, complement China's ambitious expansion plans in these domains. For Russia, Chinese technological advancement offers modernization without Western cooperation. China's advances in 5G telecommunications, semiconductor manufacturing, and digital infrastructure provide alternatives to restricted Western technology. Chinese companies have replaced Western telecoms equipment, while Chinese operating systems substitute for American products. This relationship extends to infrastructure through China's Belt and Road Initiative. China provides capital and expertise for Russia's underdeveloped eastern regions, while investing in the Northern Sea route along Russia's Arctic coast and railway projects connecting China to Europe through Russian territory. From China's perspective, Russia provides strategic depth and secure continental flanks. Their shared border, once heavily militarized during Soviet-Chinese tensions, now represents a secure boundary allowing China to focus military resources elsewhere, particularly toward potential flashpoints in the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea. The security relationship creates an interior position, the ability to move forces across secure continental territory, while potential adversaries must navigate around the Eurasian landmass, particularly valuable when maritime choke points might be contested. For both nations, these complementary strengths create resilience against Western pressure. Western sanctions targeting Russian energy exports directly accelerated Russian-Chinese energy ties, while technology restrictions increased joint development projects. The economic trends confirm this growing relationship. Bilateral trade has grown from $16 billion in 2003 to over $190 billion in 2022. Russia's trade patterns have fundamentally shifted. In 2013, the European Union accounted for 49.4% of Russian trade with China at just 10.5%. But by 2022, China had become Russia's largest trading partner, 22.7%, while the EU's share fell to 36.4%. What makes this partnership particularly resilient is its foundation in addressing fundamental structural weaknesses. Russia's challenges with economic diversification find partial remedy in Chinese manufacturing cooperation, while China's resource security concerns, particularly energy vulnerability, find solution in Russian supply agreements. Together, these nations form a counterweight to Western influence that neither could achieve alone. Their partnership represents more than diplomatic convenience. It has evolved into economic necessity for both sides, creating a geopolitical fulcrum that shifts the balance of global power eastward to dollarization, building financial independence. Economic necessity has brought Russia and China closer, but their partnership faces a fundamental vulnerability. Despite their combined strength, both nations remain exposed to a system where their transactions, reserves, and economic lifelines can be disrupted at the stroke of a pen in Washington, Brussels, or London. This realization has driven them to undertake what may be their most ambitious joint project, creating an entirely new financial architecture beyond Western reach. The 2014 sanctions against Russia following the annexation of Crimea served as a harsh wake-up call. When Western powers froze Russian assets, restricted access to capital markets, and limited technology transfers, Moscow faced a stark reality. Economic sovereignty is meaningless when your transactions flow through systems controlled by adversaries. For China, watching Russia's financial isolation was like witnessing a preview of potential future scenarios they might face. This vulnerability inspired an unprecedented financial engineering project. The systematic construction of alternative payment mechanisms, currency arrangements, and financial institutions designed to function independently of Western control. China's cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, and Russia's system for transfer of financial messages, SPFS, form the foundation of this parallel financial universe, providing strategic independence from Western monitoring and potential sanctions. Launched in 2015, CIPS provides clearing and settlement services for cross-border yuan transactions under complete Chinese control. By 2023, the system expanded to include over 1,300 financial institutions across 103 countries, processing 15,000 transactions daily. While smaller than SWIFT, CIPS represents the infrastructure for international trade without dollar-denominated transactions. Similarly, Russia's SPFS emerged directly from necessity after 2014 sanctions. Operating across 52 countries by mid-2023, SPFS handles approximately 70% of Russia's domestic financial messaging, demonstrating alternative systems can function effectively when required. The interoperability between these systems represents their greatest achievement. Since 2019, Russian and Chinese authorities created seamless integration between CIPS and SPFS, allowing transactions to flow between partner countries without touching Western infrastructure, much like building a modern highway system parallel to aging bridges controlled by potential adversaries. De-dollarization appears strikingly in bilateral trade statistics. From 90% dollar to euro settlements in 2013, Russia-China trade shifted dramatically to just 33% by 2023, with yuan accounting for 65% of transactions. The 2019 agreement to settle all bilateral energy trades in national currencies marked a turning point. A prime example is Gazprom's 2022 Power of Siberia pipeline deal, where the Russian energy giant now accepts yuan exclusively for natural gas supplied to China, completely bypassing dollar intermediation, the first major energy transaction completely outside Western financial control. Both countries have systematically reduced exposure to dollar assets while increasing physical gold holdings. Russia's central bank increased gold reserves from 450 tons in 2008 to over 2,300 tons by 2023, making it the fifth largest sovereign gold holder globally. China similarly expanded its official reserves to 2,113 tons, with analysts suggesting actual holdings may be higher. This gold accumulation represents preparation for a financial system where physical assets provide value independent of Western currencies. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, represent perhaps the most forward-looking development. China's digital yuan leads global CBDC efforts with 261 million users across 30 pilot regions as of 2023. Unlike cryptocurrencies, the digital yuan offers central bank control while providing speed, reduced costs, and independence from Western payment networks. Russia's accelerated digital ruble project creates potential for near-instantaneous cross-border settlements without SWIFT or Western banks, essentially building a digital expressway around the toll roads of the Western financial system. This alternative financial architecture extends to institutions as well. The Universal Credit Rating Group aims to create alternative credit worthiness assessments. The BRICS New Development Bank and Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, with combined capital exceeding $150 billion, provide development financing without Western conditionality. The BRICS Contingent Reserve Arrangement offers $100 billion for emergency liquidity assistance as an alternative to the IMF. These initiatives face substantial challenges. The dollar's network effects and liquidity create powerful incentives for its continued use. The yuan lacks full convertibility, and technical integration between systems proves complex. Yet the direction is clear. The Russia-China financial architecture grows more sophisticated and attractive to countries seeking alternatives to Western financial dominance. For smaller economies caught between competing power blocks, these systems offer opportunity through reduced transaction costs and freedom from Western conditionality, but risk creating dependence on a new system with its own rules. This parallel financial universe remains incomplete, yet its foundations have been laid more thoroughly than many Western observers recognize. Even if the dollar maintains global predominance, the existence of functioning alternatives changes the calculus of economic statecraft. When sanctions no longer mean isolation, but merely redirection through alternative channels, their coercive power diminishes. The New Silk Road, China's global infrastructure vision. The redirection of trade through alternative financial channels is only part of the story. While digital networks provide crucial financial infrastructure, China has simultaneously been building something far more tangible, an expansive network of railways, highways, and ports that is literally reshaping global trade routes. This physical transformation of commerce represents the largest reorganization of international trade since European powers first established maritime connections to Asia centuries ago. In 2013, speaking at Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan, President Xi Jinping unveiled a vision that would come to dwarf all other infrastructure initiatives in modern history. He proposed creating an economic belt stretching from China through Central Asia to Europe, reviving ancient trading pathways. 1 month later in Indonesia, she expanded this concept to include a maritime Silk Road spanning the South China Sea, Indian Ocean, and Mediterranean. Together, these components formed the Belt and Road Initiative. The scale of BRI defies easy comprehension. Conservative estimates place total planned investment at $1 trillion, though some analysts project the final figure could reach $8 trillion by 2049. The centennial of the People's Republic of China. By 2023, China had signed cooperation agreements with 148 countries and 32 international organizations, representing roughly 75% of the world's population and 55% of global GDP. BRI distinguishes itself through its comprehensive approach. While Western development banks typically fund specific projects with stringent governance conditions, China's initiative takes a holistic view of connectivity, creating entire economic corridors with coordinated infrastructure networks. The financing occurs through bilateral loans via policy banks like the China Development Bank, bypassing multilateral institutions with their complex approval processes. The land-based economic belt consists of 6 major corridors connecting China to Europe, the Persian Gulf, and Southeast Asia. The new Eurasian land bridge stands as the crown jewel, linking Chinese manufacturing hubs to European markets. What was once a trickle of 17 freight trains in 2011 has transformed into a torrent of over 15,000 trains annually by 2022. In Korgos, Kazakhstan, once a remote desert outpost, a massive dry port now processes thousands of containers daily. Local families who previously subsisted on livestock herding now find employment in logistics, though many worry about economic dependence on China. These trains complete journeys in 12 to 14 days, compared to the 30 to 45 days required for sea transport. Other corridors include routes through Mongolia and Russia, Central and West Asia, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and connections to Southeast Asia. The maritime component includes strategic port investments across the Indo-Pacific region. At Hambantota in Sri Lanka, a sleepy fishing harbor has transformed into a deepwater port handling massive container ships. After Sri Lanka struggled with loan repayments, the port was leased to a Chinese state company for 99 years, a cautionary tale that has prompted other nations to scrutinize BRI terms more carefully. Particularly significant is the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, which includes pipelines from the Bay of Bengal to Yunnan province. This provides China with an alternative route for energy imports that bypasses the Malacca Strait, a choke point through which approximately 80% of China's oil imports traditionally flow. This alternative represents a major strategic gain for Beijing. Russia's role has evolved significantly since 2014. Initially cautious about Chinese expansion into Central Asia, Moscow has increasingly embraced BRI as Western sanctions limited its economic options. The Arctic dimension holds particular potential, with climate change gradually opening new shipping routes along Russia's Arctic coast, potentially reducing transit times between Asia and Europe by up to 40% compared to the Suez Canal. This infrastructure revolution creates alternatives to sea lanes traditionally controlled by the United States Navy. By establishing land routes and developing port facilities in countries less susceptible to Western pressure, China has significantly reduced its vulnerability to maritime blockades. If choke points like the Malacca Strait were blocked in a conflict, China would have multiple alternatives for essential commerce. These new ports could also potentially serve dual commercial military purposes, providing maintenance and resupply points for Chinese naval vessels operating far from home waters. Western powers have responded with alternative initiatives like the U.S.-led Build Back Better World and the European Union's Global Gateway, emphasizing transparency and environmental standards. However, they struggle to match the scale and implementation speed of Chinese projects. The physical transformation continues despite challenges. Industrial parks and special economic zones have sprung up along major corridors, creating new centers of economic activity. Cities like Duisburg, Germany, where Chinese freight trains now arrive daily at Europe's largest inland port, have been revitalized by this east-west commerce. When combined with the alternative financial channels discussed earlier, these physical trade routes create a more resilient economic system less vulnerable to Western pressure. Countries threatened with exclusion from Western-dominated systems now have viable alternatives for trade, investment, and connectivity. This infrastructure network doesn't merely facilitate commerce. It fundamentally alters the strategic landscape, creating new military logistics possibilities that extend China's potential operational reach far beyond its borders. Brothers in arms, military cooperation. While new trade corridors reshape Eurasia's economic landscape, an equally profound transformation has occurred behind closed doors of military installations. Former adversaries who once aimed nuclear warheads at each other now coordinate missile defense systems and conduct joint naval exercises in waters thousands of miles from their borders. What changed to turn these Cold War enemies into military partners? Picture this. Chinese tanks rolling across the Siberian wilderness alongside Russian troops, aircraft from both nations sharing the same skies. This was the scene at Vostok 2018, the same region where Soviet and Chinese soldiers once fired upon each other, now hosting their combined military might. Over 3,200 Chinese personnel joined 300,000 Russian troops in a display of cooperation that would have been unthinkable during the Cold War. This partnership evolved from cautious beginnings to strategic alignment. Their first joint exercise in 2005 was largely symbolic, with modest anti-terrorism drills. By 2012, they established annual naval exercises called Joint Sea, starting with basic maneuvers in the Yellow Sea before expanding dramatically in scope and significance. The 2016 Joint Sea exercises in the contested South China Sea delivered a clear message to regional powers. Chinese and Russian warships practiced island seizure operations and anti-submarine warfare, capabilities directly relevant to potential conflicts over disputed territories. By 2017, their naval cooperation reached the Baltic Sea, challenging NATO in waters historically considered its domain. The partnership reached new heights in 2019 when Russian Tu-95 and Chinese H-6K strategic bombers flew together over the Sea of Japan, triggering air defense alerts across multiple nations. Like medieval armies combining forces, these former rivals demonstrated their ability to project joint power in sensitive airspace between America's closest Asian allies. Technology transfers have accelerated China's military modernization significantly. Russia's S-400 air defense system, sold to China in 2015, functions like a sophisticated shield capable of tracking and engaging multiple airborne threats simultaneously. This system complicates U.S. air operations in potential Taiwan crisis scenarios by creating protected zones where aircraft cannot safely operate. Russian aerospace expertise has similarly enhanced Chinese capabilities. The sale of Su-35 fighter jets equipped China with highly maneuverable combat aircraft, but the true value lay in the advanced engines. Technology China had struggled to develop independently. These engines serve as the heart of modern fighter aircraft, determining performance in ways that pilot skills alone cannot overcome. The cooperation extends to the most sensitive military technologies. In 2019, Russia began helping China create a missile warning system, technology traditionally shared only with the closest allies. This system functions as an early alarm that provides precious minutes to respond to incoming threats, fundamentally altering nuclear deterrence calculations. Their partnership continues into space, integrating satellite navigation systems to reduce dependence on U.S. GPS, critical for both civilian infrastructure and military operations. By 2021, they announced plans for a joint lunar research station, extending their challenge to American leadership beyond Earth itself. What makes this relationship particularly significant is how it addresses each country's vulnerabilities. China gains expertise in aircraft engines and submarine propulsion, areas where its technology has lagged. Russia receives vital investment for its defense industry and access to Chinese advancements in drone and cyber capabilities. The coordination has expanded to joint defense planning, with synchronized military doctrines and secure communication channels between their forces. During the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing, Presidents Xi and Putin jointly opposed further enlargement of NATO and criticized America's Indo-Pacific strategy, reflecting their shared strategic concerns. This military alignment challenges Western defense planners significantly. U.S. forces must now prepare for scenarios where Chinese operations receive Russian support across multiple domains. The Joint Sea 2023 naval exercise demonstrated this evolving partnership as Russian and Chinese warships conducted joint patrols with Iranian naval forces in the Gulf of Oman. Despite the deepening relationship, limitations remain. Both militaries restrict access to their most sensitive capabilities, with Russians concerned about Chinese reverse engineering and Chinese planners cautious about dependency on Russian support. Cultural differences and language barriers complicate operations, and neither has established permanent bases on the other's territory. Yet the trajectory is clear. What began as tentative arms sales has evolved into a comprehensive military partnership spanning multiple domains. While not a formal alliance with mutual defense obligations, this relationship enables both powers to challenge Western military advantages simultaneously, forcing the United States and its allies to divide attention between European and Indo-Pacific theaters, like a chess player forced to defend against threats on opposite sides of the board. Reshaping global governance, the institutional challenge. Beyond the battlefield, Russia and China have set their sights on an even more ambitious target. The very institutions that have governed international relations since 1945. Their joint effort is creating an entirely new framework of global governance, a parallel institutional architecture designed to circumvent Western influence. The post-World War II international order was built largely by Western powers. The Bretton Woods Conference established the International Monetary Fund and World Bank with voting rights proportional to capital contributions, ensuring American and European dominance. The United Nations, while universal in membership, structured its Security Council to give 5 powers, including Russia and China, veto authority. But the wider UN ecosystem has typically reflected Western priorities. Institutions like the World Trade Organization, G7, and OECD similarly embodied Western approaches to economic governance, democracy, and development. Despite representing major economic powers, Russia and China remain underrepresented in these institutions' leadership. At the IMF, China holds only 6.08% of voting rights despite being the world's second-largest economy, while Russia commands just 2.59%. Together, they control less voting power than the United States alone at 16.5%. This institutional imbalance has motivated Moscow and Beijing to reshape global governance from outside. Their strategy has evolved into a comprehensive architecture of alternative institutions. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization has expanded far beyond its original border security mandate to become a multidimensional organization encompassing nearly half the world's population. Following Iran's full membership in 2023, the SCO now includes 9 member states spanning from Eastern Europe to South Asia. India's participation creates a forum where 3 nuclear powers can coordinate policies outside Western oversight. The SCO's Interbank Consortium finances major development projects across Central Asia, with capital commitments exceeding $20 billion. Through expanding both its membership and functional scope, the SCO has evolved from a regional forum into a comprehensive security framework that rivals NATO's role in Europe, but without Western participation. The transformation of BRICS represents another significant institutionalization effort. The 2023 BRICS Summit marked a watershed moment when 6 new countries received invitations to join: Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. The expanded BRICS Plus would represent approximately 45% of a global population and 37% of global GDP, creating an economic counterweight to the G7. BRICS institutional development includes the New Development Bank, which has approved over $30 billion in infrastructure projects since 2015. Unlike Western-led banks, the NDB imposes no governance requirements on borrowers. The bank has begun issuing bonds denominated in local currencies rather than dollars, advancing de-dollarization while expanding capital access for developing nations. The BRICS Contingent Reserve Arrangement, with $100 billion in committed capital, parallels the IMF's function as a lender of last resort, but without requiring the controversial structural adjustment programs that became contentious during past financial crises. Within existing multilateral institutions, Russia and China have refined their coordination. At the UN Security Council, they have exercised their veto power in tandem more frequently since 2011, blocking Western-sponsored resolutions on Syria, Venezuela, and Myanmar. This coordination extends beyond blocking actions to setting the agenda, jointly sponsoring resolutions that emphasize state sovereignty over liberal interventionism. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank represents perhaps their most successful institutional initiative. Launched in 2016, the AIIB now boasts 105 approved members worldwide with $100 billion in authorized capital. Despite American pressure, traditional U.S. allies, including the United Kingdom, Germany, and France, joined as founding members, marking the first time major Western powers joined a China-led multilateral institution against explicit American opposition. These parallel institutions attract developing nations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, countries that represent the majority of the world's population but have historically lacked proportional influence in Western-dominated institutions. The appeal extends beyond the developing world, with European powers joining the AIIB and several EU members embracing Chinese and Russian institutional initiatives while maintaining their formal Western alignments. What we're witnessing resembles an upgrade in global governance. If the post-1945 order was akin to a closed operating system controlled by a few Western powers, these new institutions represent an open-source alternative, allowing countries to select components that serve their needs without requiring complete allegiance to either system. By creating parallel structures, rather than merely seeking greater influence within existing ones, Russia and China are constructing an alternative international order that can function independently of Western approval. These institutions embody different principles, emphasizing state sovereignty over liberal interventionism, development without political conditions, and multipolarity over Western leadership. The institutional architecture being constructed creates viable alternatives that gradually drain legitimacy, participation, and relevance from Western-dominated frameworks. It's a strategy of creating institutional redundancy across every domain of global governance, security, finance, development, and trade. As these parallel institutions continue developing, will countries increasingly choose which system better serves their interests? The middle powers, caught between giants. As these competing global architectures take shape, what happens to the nations caught in the middle? From Vietnam to Kazakhstan, from Turkey to Saudi Arabia, countries representing billions of people now navigate a treacherous diplomatic landscape where neutrality becomes increasingly untenable, yet alignment with either side carries significant risks. These nations, often called middle powers, exist in a precarious position, like tightrope walkers balancing between competing forces. They lack the military or economic might to dictate terms on the world stage, but possess enough agency to pursue independent strategies rather than simply following larger powers. For these middle powers, the intensifying competition between the Western Bloc and the Russia-China partnership creates a fundamental challenge: how to maintain sovereignty and extract benefits while avoiding being crushed between competing giants. The sophisticated hedging strategies employed by middle powers include several common elements. They avoid formal military alliances that might limit flexibility, diversify economic partnerships to prevent dependency on any single power, leverage their geographic position or natural resources to maximize bargaining power, and participate in multiple, sometimes competing international forums to maintain relationships across bloc lines. Kazakhstan exemplifies this Central Asian balancing act. After gaining independence from the Soviet Union, Kazakhstan found itself with Russian military bases on its territory and significant Russian-speaking populations. When protests erupted in January 2022, President Tokayev called on the Russian-led Collective Security Treaty Organization to deploy peacekeeping forces. Yet Kazakhstan has welcomed over $20 billion in Chinese investments through Belt and Road projects, making China its largest trading partner. This has led to a formal multi-vector diplomacy approach, essentially a strategic commitment to maintain positive relations with all major powers simultaneously. Vietnam demonstrates a different variation of this challenge. Still wary toward China after border conflicts as recent as 1979, Vietnam maintains territorial disputes with Beijing in the South China Sea. Yet China remains Vietnam's largest trading partner, with bilateral trade exceeding $165 billion annually. To counterbalance Chinese influence, Vietnam has strengthened security cooperation with the United States, hosting American aircraft carriers in 2018 and 2020. Visits that would have been unimaginable shortly after the Vietnam War. India faces perhaps the most complex position of all. As a founding member of the non-aligned movement during the Cold War, India has experience avoiding bloc politics. Today, it participates in BRICS alongside Russia and China, while also joining the quadrilateral security dialogue with the United States, Japan, and Australia, an arrangement aimed at containing Chinese influence. When Russia invaded Ukraine, India refused to condemn Moscow while continuing to purchase discounted Russian oil. Simultaneously, India has deepened defense cooperation with the United States. This stems from a pragmatic calculation. India needs Russian military equipment to counter China while requiring Western technology for economic development. In the Middle East, Saudi Arabia has expanded cooperation with both Russia and China while maintaining its American alliance. For Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, this diversification signals displeasure with American criticism, creates leverage in negotiations, and recognizes China's growing importance as an energy customer. Yet Saudi Arabia continues hosting American military bases, understanding that only the United States can provide certain security guarantees against regional threats. Turkey's position within NATO while purchasing Russian S-400 missile systems further illustrates these complex calculations. President Erdogan has leveraged Turkey's strategic position, controlling access to the Black Sea and sitting at Europe and Asia's crossroads, to extract concessions from both sides. When faced with Western criticism, Turkey points to alternative partnerships with Moscow and Beijing. For many middle powers, the ideal outcome is not victory for either side, but a balanced international order where multiple powers check each other's ambitions. This gives middle powers maximum room to maneuver and prevents any major power from dictating terms unilaterally. The preferences of these middle powers matter enormously for the future global order. While individually they cannot match major powers' influence, collectively they represent the majority of the world's population and a significant portion of global economic activity. Their choices about which institutions to join, which currencies to use for trade, and which security arrangements to support will largely determine whether parallel international systems can function effectively. What emerges is not a clean division of the world into competing blocks, but a complex patchwork where countries participate selectively in different aspects of competing international orders. A nation might use Chinese financial infrastructure for some transactions while remaining integrated with Western systems for others, or purchase Russian weapons while participating in American-led military exercises. This creates not a bifurcated world, but an interconnected yet increasingly fragmented international system where middle powers must constantly recalibrate their positions to survive and thrive. The energy nexus, powering the partnership. In this fragmented international system, one element stands as the foundation of the Russia-China partnership that Western sanctions failed to anticipate. What happens when the world's largest energy producer joins forces with the world's largest energy consumer? The answer is transforming global markets and creating a partnership that may be literally powered to withstand Western pressure. Energy cooperation between Russia and China represents the backbone of their strategic alignment. When President Xi and President Putin jointly inaugurated the Power of Siberia pipeline in December 2019 via video conference, they weren't simply opening a gas valve. They were creating an economic lifeline connecting two economic powerhouses, a steel artery pumping vital resources between nations seeking autonomy from Western systems. This relationship transformed remarkably over the past decade. Before 2014, negotiations frequently stalled over pricing disputes, with China driving hard bargains while Russia prioritized European markets. The landmark $400 billion gas deal signed in 2014 had been under negotiation for over a decade, with China repeatedly rejecting unfavorable terms. Western sanctions fundamentally changed this equation. Russia's urgent need to diversify from European markets gave China unprecedented leverage, securing terms significantly more favorable to Beijing than Moscow had previously accepted. This pattern intensified as sanctions expanded. The scale of this energy relationship has grown dramatically. By 2023, Russia became China's largest oil supplier, delivering approximately 2.2 million barrels daily, exceeding Saudi Arabia and Iraq combined. The transformation is stark. In 2013, Russia sent 68% of its oil exports to Europe and only 16% to Asia. By 2023, these figures essentially reversed, with over 60% flowing to Asian markets, predominantly China. The Power of Siberia pipeline exemplifies this strategic partnership, stretching 3,000 kilometers from eastern Siberian gas fields to China's northern border. Despite Western analysts initially questioning its commercial viability, the pipeline now delivers 38 billion cubic meters of gas annually to China, with expansion to 61 billion cubic meters planned by 2025. What makes this pipeline particularly significant is its exclusive connection of eastern Siberian gas fields to Chinese markets. Unlike Western infrastructure, these pipelines cannot be redirected to European customers, creating a permanent physical link between Russian resources and Chinese markets. The $55 billion investment demonstrates both countries' commitment to long-term economic integration. A second pipeline, Power of Siberia 2, will take a western route through Mongolia, potentially delivering an additional 50 billion cubic meters annually from the same western Siberian fields that previously supplied European markets, effectively redrawing the global energy map. The partnership extends beyond natural gas. Chinese companies have acquired significant stakes in Russian oil projects, particularly in the Arctic. The Yamal LNG project, with 29.9% Chinese ownership, ships liquefied natural gas to Asian markets via the Northern Sea route, reducing shipping time to Asian markets by nearly half compared to Suez Canal routes. Nuclear energy adds another critical dimension. Rosatom has built 4 nuclear reactors in China, with additional units under construction, involving technology transfer of increasingly sophisticated nuclear systems. The countries also cooperate on next-generation nuclear technologies, including fast neutron reactors and floating nuclear power plants. Perhaps most consequential is the shift in payment mechanisms. In 2015, approximately 90% of Russia-China energy trade was conducted in dollars or euros. By 2023, nearly 80% shifted to yuan or rubles. This dramatic de-dollarization directly challenges the U.S. dollar's role in global energy markets, a cornerstone of American economic power since the 1970s when the petrodollar system was established. For Russia, energy exports to China provide a sanctions-resistant revenue stream supporting state budgets. Despite accepting lower prices than European markets might offer, Russia gained strategic autonomy crucial when Western sanctions intensified in 2022. For China, Russian energy supplies address key vulnerabilities. Traditional import routes through the Malacca Strait and South China Sea remain vulnerable to potential naval blockades in conflict scenarios. Overland pipelines from Russia cannot be blockaded, providing energy security that maritime routes cannot match, while diversifying away from Middle Eastern oil dependence. The environmental dimension includes cooperation on renewable energy projects, with Chinese solar manufacturers establishing facilities in Russia's Far East, while Russian hydroelectric expertise supports Chinese dam projects. Critics note the asymmetric nature of this relationship, with Russia increasingly dependent on Chinese markets, while China maintains diverse supply options. When European markets closed following the Ukraine invasion, China secured steep discounts on Russian oil, reportedly 30 to 40% below market prices for some shipments. Nevertheless, both sides recognize their energy relationship transcends commercial calculations. When President Xi visited Moscow in March 2023, joint statements emphasized the irreplaceable role of energy cooperation in their strategic partnership. This energy nexus is reshaping global energy flows, challenging Western financial dominance, and creating physical interdependencies that will endure regardless of political changes. These energy links form the material foundation for what both countries describe as a comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination for the new era. Limits and tensions. A marriage of convenience? The physical infrastructure binding Russia and China together masks a fundamental question that keeps Western strategists awake at night. Is this alliance truly built to last, or merely a marriage of convenience that could fracture under pressure? When Putin and Xi proclaimed their no-limits partnership in February 2022, just weeks before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, they presented a united front against Western hegemony. Their joint statement declared the relationship had no forbidden areas of cooperation and denounced NATO expansion, a powerful symbol of solidarity against a common adversary. Yet beneath this choreographed display of unity lies a relationship filled with contradictions and fault lines. The asymmetry between these powers has grown increasingly pronounced. China's economy has expanded to roughly 10 times the size of Russia's, creating an imbalance that transforms their partnership. Alexander Gabuev of the Carnegie Endowment observes starkly, Russia is becoming a junior partner, and China is going to be the center of gravity in this relationship. This economic disparity manifests in their trade structure. China provides Russia with high-value manufactured goods and technology, while Russia primarily supplies raw materials and weaponry. The relationship increasingly resembles a colonial dynamic, with Russia serving as a resource appendage to China's industrial core. Population trends tell an equally concerning story. Russia's demographic decline contrasts sharply against China's vast human capital. Russia's Far East, larger than Europe, but home to just 6 million Russians, borders Chinese provinces containing over 100 million inhabitants. This demographic imbalance fuels persistent Russian anxieties about Chinese influence in these territories, despite public declarations of friendship. Central Asia has become a visible arena of competition. These former Soviet republics, historically Russia's backyard, now find themselves aggressively courted by Chinese investment. Beijing's economic initiatives frequently overshadow Moscow's security guarantees in practical importance to regional governments. The competition manifests in telling ways. Russia invited Chinese capital to its Vostochny Cosmodrome space facility, but carefully restricted access to non-sensitive areas. As China expands belt and road projects through Central Asia, Russia occasionally slows border crossings or imposes regulatory hurdles delaying Chinese shipments. Small, but revealing signs of underlying tension. Military technology transfers expose another friction point. While supplying China with advanced systems like the S-400 air defense platform, Russia does so cautiously. We sell them one system and soon face 5 copied versions in the international arms market, one Russian defense analyst noted, referencing how the Chinese J-15 fighter jet bears striking similarities to Russia's Su-33. Moscow increasingly withholds its most advanced systems from Beijing or delivers modified versions with downgraded capabilities, a practice reflecting deep-seated mistrust. Historical memory casts long shadows over this partnership. The Sino-Soviet split of the 1960s, which escalated to armed border clashes, remains in Russian institutional memory. Meanwhile, Chinese strategists remember centuries of Russian territorial expansion. The 1858 Treaty of Agen and 1860 Treaty of Peking, transferring vast territories from Qing China to the Russian Empire, remain unhealed wounds in Chinese historical consciousness. History doesn't disappear, it just goes underground, explains Bobo Lo, former head of the Russia program at Chatham House. These historical grievances simmer beneath contemporary relations, ready to resurface when strategic interests diverge. Cultural differences further complicate integration. Linguistic barriers persist despite decades of engagement. Business cultures clash as Russian entrepreneurs struggle with Chinese negotiation styles. Even high-level meetings reveal subtle differences in diplomatic approaches. Information flows asymmetrically between the nations. China's Great Firewall blocks Russian media from reaching Chinese audiences, while Russian internet remains relatively open to Chinese narratives, creating an imbalance in mutual understanding. The growing perception that Russia is becoming China's junior partner troubles Moscow elites. Sergei Karaganov, a prominent Russian foreign policy intellectual, has warned against becoming China's resource appendage. arguing Russia must maintain strategic autonomy despite the partnership's benefits. The pandemic exposed additional frictions. China's abrupt border closures stranded thousands of Russians and disrupted trade without consultation. Russia's early vaccine diplomacy proceeded without significant Chinese collaboration, revealing coordination limitations during crisis. Even their celebrated energy relationship contains discord. China has leveraged Russia's post-sanctions isolation to negotiate favorable pricing terms. When Russia needed alternative markets after Western sanctions, Chinese negotiators extracted significant discounts, commercial hardball contradicting the partnership's fraternal rhetoric. Arctic development presents competing visions. Russia views the region primarily through a security lens and as sovereign territory, while China, declaring itself a near-Arctic state, promotes an internationalized approach that would dilute Russian control. These tensions don't predict imminent rupture. Both countries derive substantial benefits from cooperation and share strategic interest in counterbalancing Western influence. Their partnership will likely continue as long as both perceive the United States as their primary challenge. Yet the relationship's pragmatic foundations differ fundamentally from the ideological solidarity of the 1950s Sino-Soviet alliance, making it potentially more adaptable, but also more vulnerable to changing circumstances. What we've witnessed throughout this exploration isn't merely a temporary alignment of interests, but a fundamental restructuring of global power dynamics. The Moscow-Beijing axis represents the most significant challenge to Western-dominated institutions since the Cold War ended. This partnership has transformed global finance, military deployments, energy markets, and developmental paradigms. Nations worldwide now recalibrate their diplomatic calculations in response. As we reflect on this journey, a critical question emerges. Will this multipolar order foster balanced coexistence, create competing blocs, or spark dangerous confrontation between incompatible visions? From historical grievances to modern challenges, one certainty remains. The Western monopoly